Some cases were never solved. Some calls were never traced.
Imagine sitting in a pitch-black, entirely silent room, and then the faders on your mixing board start moving by themselves. Daniel Mercer is a sound engineer. For 11 years, he built a career on the science of audio, measuring life in decibels and predictable frequencies. At 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, he was running a routine, solitary broadcast check at station WKND, an isolated FM transmitter 20 miles outside Harlow Creek, Pennsylvania. 17 minutes later, the main mixing board spiked. The equipment registered a clean, deliberate signal. The waveform matched the exact audio profile of a human being leaning into a live microphone and slowly exhaling. Daniel searched the empty station and found nothing. Then, at 2:47 a.m., the spike returned. He pushed the gain up and uncovered a voice buried under 16 layers of static, forcing out broken syllables. The voice said, "Don't turn off the light." A second later, every light in the building died. Daniel had spent his adult life trusting only what he could measure on a spectrum analyzer. Sitting in the dark, he was now confronting a coherent signal that mathematically should not exist. The station was pitch black, save for a single detail. Above the cracked door to Studio A, the red on-air bulb was pulsing in the dark, slowly, like a heartbeat. This diagram shows the station's electrical schematic. That on-air light runs on the same circuit as the rest of the building. With the main breaker dead, the bulb was physically severed from power, yet continued drawing a massive localized energy surge. Daniel approached the cracked door. From inside Studio A, he heard rhythmic, patient breathing. He pushed the heavy, soundproof door open. The breathing inside stopped, and then he felt it, warm and steady, exhaling directly onto the back of his neck. The anomaly was no longer confined to the digital data on the mixing board. By manipulating the station's local power grid and manifesting a physical presence in the hallway, the signal proved it could interact with the physical world as easily as a radio wave. Retreating to the control board, Daniel spent the next 3 hours tearing through local county archives. He discovered that station WKND was constructed in 1987, directly over the demolished concrete foundation of Harlow Creek's original hospital, Mercy General. Digging into the property records, he found a buried story from a March 1983 newspaper. The headline read, "Mercy General closes experimental wing after patient deaths." That isolated wing housed a highly classified program managed by a neurologist named Dr. Emile Lazar. Lazar had secured private funding to build experimental receiving equipment deep in the hospital's basement. The geographic overlap provided a clear point of origin. The isolated radio transmitter was broadcasting directly over Lazar's fatal 1980s testing ground, rooting the supernatural interference in a very real historical cover-up. This vector graphic illustrates Dr. Lazar's core hypothesis. He proposed that human consciousness survives physical death by converting into an electromagnetic radio wave, releasing a final, intense burst of energy the moment the brain flatlines. Lazar believed these audio waveforms carried the complete psychological profile of the deceased, their memories, their personality, and their exact voice. 14 patients died while he constructed the machinery to receive them. Following the deaths, Lazar vanished. The county health board seized his documentation and sealed the protocol. They stamped the file, cognitohazardous material, indefinite suppression. A cognitohazard is a specific classification of threat. It refers to a piece of information or an idea that causes tangible, catastrophic harm to a human being, simply by being known, processed, and understood by the brain. The Lazar protocol succeeded, and that success forced the county health board to bury the research, sealing away a localized, highly infectious threat to the human mind. At 6:03 a.m., Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID was blank. When he answered, he heard an overlapping, arguing choir of 14 distinct people, layered tightly together on a frequency human ears aren't built to decode cleanly. Dr. Lazar's calm voice cut through the static. The dead had spent 40 years absorbing the station's endless noise. Tonight, they required an answer. Daniel grabbed his keys to flee, but before he could open the exit, the studio monitor speakers crackled to life. through the hiss came the clear, tender voice of his 7-year-old daughter, asleep 12 miles away. She said, "Daddy, come listen." The frequency bypassed Daniel's scientific training and logic. It analyzed his mind and weaponized his most vulnerable emotional attachment to force his compliance. He didn't leave. Daniel Mercer walked back into Studio A, sat down at the live microphone, and made the active choice to listen to the dead. Lazar's experiments failed because he viewed the human mind as a simple radio transmitter. In reality, the brain is a transceiver. It both sends and receives. By tuning his equipment to the frequency of the dead, Lazar inadvertently opened a two-way connection, allowing the signal to travel back into the minds of the living. This frequency is not tied to 1980s analog tape. It is a mathematical pattern of electromagnetic energy. Whether that pattern is carried by a radio tower or reconstructed by the processor in your phone, the information, the cognitohazard, remains intact and infectious. You have been listening to the exact details of Daniel's broadcast for the duration of this video. The cognitohazard has had ample time to locate your specific frequency. You are no longer an objective observer. By processing this story, you have become an active host to the hollow frequency. They already know your name.